Hello there, welcome to my channel. This is the beginning of my review series of the Penstar N10 Pro, which is the sequel to the device they released last year, which in of itself is the Western version of a device released by a company called Hanvan in the Chinese market. So hopefully that all made sense, but basically the N10 Pro is just released here in the third quarter of 2025, and this video will start the review with an unboxing, my first impressions of the hardware. We'll then go into a video tour in the next video, and then we'll finish in the third part of our series with the final review. But let's put the Penstar a little bit into context. And I think that looking at the marketplace, the device that it's going to compete with the most is the Boox Go 10.3. And I'll just put here on the screen, we'll start by comparing the prices of the two. Now, it doesn't look like there's much of a gap between these, $10, the Boox being a little bit more expensive, but that kind of depends on how you count things. And what I mean by that is the Penstar comes with the device, the case, and a stylus, as well as nibs. The Boox device does as well if you buy from Boox.com. But if you don't buy from Boox.com, you buy, say, from Amazon instead, then the cover isn't included and you have to pay an additional $50 for the device. So it depends on how you look at it. You can either say the Penstar is either $10 or $60 less expensive than the Boox device, depending on how you count things. Now, the reason why you might not want to buy from Boox, and I usually buy all my devices straight from Boox, again, to get those best deals, but I also know that I'm not going to be returning the device. If you start getting into the area of returns, it's an incredible pain in the arse. I tried to return a device at one point with Boox, and ultimately just found it was better to use eBay and take that hit than it is to go through the process with Boox. So that's a reason why you might not want to go with that. So I kind of think that the Penstar effectively has about a $60 price advantage, but again, it just depends on how you get the device. Now, if we start going into the actual stats of the two devices, very similar. We see both with 300 ppi for screen resolution, and that's as high as black and white e-ink screens go, so it's very sharp and crisp. We see 10.3-inch screens. A little bit of a difference in the processor. The Boox processor is just a little bit better. Not sure if that's particularly significant, and ultimately how the software is applied will determine that impact. Both have 4 gigabytes of RAM, but the Penstar does have double the storage of Boox. So that's a big advantage in Penstar's favor. The battery also is really significant for Penstar. It's almost twice the size, but again, it will depend heavily on the software. So the battery size alone will never actually tell you the whole story. We'll have to see how the device does with battery tests, and that will be released with the final video. But at least in terms of size, the Penstar does have the larger one. The Boox is a thinner and it's lighter, although that's just the device itself. And we'll do a weigh-in in this video comparing the Boox to the Penstar with the device cover and stylus included. And that will paint a different picture than what we see on the table here. And finally, Android. Boox is running a slightly older version of Android. The Penstar is running a more updated version. I'm not an expert in this, but I don't think that in my personal experience, this is particularly significant. And I won't say anything more than that. It's just the kind of the base operating system that the devices are operating on, and both are still maintained and are fine as far as I can tell. The Boox Go 10.3 though does have the Google Play Store where the Penstar does not, so that's particularly notable. The Boox has a touchscreen, the Penstar doesn't. I'm highlighting this as an advantage for Boox, but actually this is a pretty key differentiator. And if you want a device that doesn't have a touchscreen, the Penstar would therefore be the better option because it natively doesn't have touch. I think most people probably would want touch, but I think there's also people out there that don't want to accidentally hit things as they're writing, as an example, and would be intrigued by this type of an option. So that is an advantage for one or the other, depending on your preferences. No front lighting in either. Both have included styluses, regardless of where you buy them. Penstar has two, for some odd reason. And then the cover depends on where you buy the Books device, where Penstar's it's included. So those are kind of all the specifications, and you can see some advantages from one versus the other, but the general theme is they're very similar in terms of specifications. There's not a dramatic departure in terms of what we're seeing on this table. Slight advantages here or there, but so pretty much toe-to-toe. So good omen for the Penstar that sells potentially, again, at that $60 discount. Now, to put the Books Penstar kind of competition in the broader perspective, I can kind of break down the marketplace for e-ink note-taking into 4 segments. So the first segment would be kind of the entry-level segment, and this is where maybe some of the smaller devices come into play, although you do see 10-inch devices, for example, from CloudNote, in this area. And this is basically an area where you have note-taking devices that are functional but don't have necessarily all the features or the bells and whistles of the more sophisticated devices that are in the upper tiers. It's an area that you might purchase a device if you were just kind of interested but didn't want to commit much money. But generally speaking, that's a category you want to avoid. Then there is kind of the mid-level premium area of the market, and this is where I think Books and Penstar sit, and people love the Books device because it's such a well-balanced device. It has a lot of premium features, some compromises, but I think probably the right ones, and so it comes in at a much lower price point. And by compromises, I mean things like there's no front lighting, things like it has a little bit more ghosting on the device. It's just not quite as premium as what you'll see in the next tier over, but I think for a lot of people, those are trade-offs they're willing to make, and I think the popularity of the Go 10.3 is because they are at this slightly lower price point while still retaining the key features that you get in the level above. And so Penstar being in there is really a rare competition for the Books Go 10.3. So it's an interesting to review this device from that context. Just continuing on, the next level would then be what I would call kind of the premium marketplace. And this is where you see a lot of your players, like you would see Supernote, Viwoods, the Books, Note Air 4C, and so on, play in that space. And it's probably, it's the most premium space, but still at a relatively good price point, usually around $500 plus or minus. And that's, I think, really the most popular. And then there's what I would call the ultra premium space, which is, over $600. And these are, larger devices or maybe inappropriately priced devices in some respects. So it's a really mixed bag. Some devices are excellent, like the Books Note Max fits in that category, and that's a tremendously great device. But then there's other devices which frankly are in that range, but shouldn't be because they're just priced too high in general. So that's how I break down the marketplace. And so again, while this Penstar device is really interesting, is because it's a rare competitor in that second segment. But having said all that and kind of set that stage, let's go ahead and then start the unboxing, and we'll look to see what's inside the package. And we'll start we'll also go through the setup process, and that will conclude with my impressions of the hardware and general thoughts going forward. So let's go ahead and dig on in. Okay, so here it is, the Penstar eNote. Now, when I purchased this on Amazon, it was identified as the eNote 2, but as we can see here, it's identified as the N10 Pro model, and there's actually no reference to eNote 2 on the box. So that's kind of curious. And here you can see some of the marketing. They've got an app that you can sync onto the cloud. Massive batteries we talked about before. I didn't talk about this, 8,192 levels of pressure sensitivity. That is actually twice what we see on other e-ink devices. My thing about this is I don't think I can discern 4,000 levels of pressure sensitivity, so I'm not sure what the effect of 8,000 would be on my experience. We'll have to take a look. I suppose if you were more of an artist, someone that liked to sketch, that might be more relevant and maybe you'd be more sensitive to that. I'm not sure I'll notice that, but we'll see as we go through the review process. Let's flip this over onto the back, get a little more specs here so we can see some of the details, and much of this was shared on the grid I showed leading up to this. And I'll just point out though that their website, as you can see over here, is penstardeal.com. As of this filming, and this is kind of toward the end of August when I'm filming this, when you go to that website, you only see references to last year's model. There's no reference whatsoever to this model. You can only find that on Amazon.com, at least, again, as of this viewing. So kind of curious, or a little bit behind on their marketing, and I would hope that would be resolved by the time this video is released, but we'll see. Okay, let's go ahead and slide that off and take a look at the contents inside. So we'll flip this over. Get the lid off, and here we are. Just one quick comment. You can see a lot of companies do this now, but you see a little bit of padding here on the top of the lid so that the device doesn't take any damage in transit. Here is the device itself. So we'll go ahead and take off the plastic, and it comes with the case on, which is kind of interesting. Let's look at the back. There's the kind of slanted edges, and then if we flip it open, there we go. So the button profile here on the side is much smaller than it looked like on the videos, and I like it. I like the smaller footprint. On pictures and images, it looks a lot bigger and a little more geeky, I guess. This is a nice profile. And you can see this is magnetic, so there's how you can take out the case. There's two tabs located here and up here, and they align with this, and that creates kind of a magnetic connection. All right, let's keep going. Inside, there's a quick start guide, which we will ignore. And you've got the contents, and that should be pretty much it. So let's take a look at what we have here. Pull it out, and okay, so here we have the two styli in plastic cases. Curious that they have two. I've never lost or broke a stylus before, so not sure I need two of them, but I suppose, why not? Here's that USB-C A to C cable, and then finally you have your additional nibs. Let's pull that out, and so there's a removal tool there, and then you've got 10 nibs on top. Okay, pretty nice. Yeah, let's go ahead and weigh this and see what we're talking about in terms of weight. So just a few more comments about the device itself. As noted, we do have the two tabs for the half folio case there. On the bottom is where the USB-C connection is. I don't see a power indicator on this. And then on top is the power button. There's nothing else along the sides. It does have a grill here between the buttons and the bezel of the device, and that would be for both speakers and microphones. So I think that's your 4-point microphone there, and those are probably speakers right there, at least certainly right there. So they're front-facing, essentially. And that's about it. Again, another look at the back. There you go. There's some of the legalese down below. Again, called the N10 Pro, no reference to the eNote 2. Okay, it's a little strange to hold. I have to note that this is the flat side here, and these are the sides that have kind of the sloping edges and you notice it, it's not bad. It's just a little bit odd at first, and then you kind of quickly get used to it. So there you go. Let's go ahead and bring up the scale, and let's go ahead and turn this on. Make sure we're on grams. We are, and here we go. 402 grams, which is relatively light. That's a nice weight. And then let's go ahead and add in the cover. The half folio cover puts it in at 484. And if we put the stylus on top of that, then we end up 498. All right, so again, going back to our theme of comparing this device to the Go 10.3, what we see basically is the reason why people go with half folio covers, and it's real simple. It's to reduce weight. So the device itself, the Penstar device, is actually heavier than the Go 10.3 by slightly, by about 28 grams. The styluses are the same, but the difference comes in the covers. And so the total weight of all these things for the Penstar is 498 grams, but for the Go 10.3, it's 652. Pretty significant difference, and all down to the fact that this uses a half folio. So obviously the advantage of a half folio is weight. The disadvantage is you're only protecting half of the device at any point in time. So the theory is the most important thing when you're traveling with the device is the screen. So the half folio covers that. And then the most important thing when you're not using the cover is that you're covering up the back, and the folio does that. Now, this doesn't have any type of padded feet, so there is the chance that this back plate might get scratched a bit. You know, when you're placing it, say you're just putting it on a table, the cover is going to be on top initially until you fold it over. So a little bit less effective than a full cover. I have to say, in my experience, because I use a half folio with the Manta, and then I usually use a full folio with all other devices, I don't really have an opinion or a preference on that, having used both. I'm kind of ambivalent toward it. So I guess by default then, the half folio kind of makes sense because less weight overall, and that advantage is kind of the tiebreaker of it. That's one way to look at it, I suppose. But nothing against half folios. And you do, of course, have that advantage. So, just some thoughts on that. Let's go ahead and start up the startup process. Actually, a couple quick notes, again, going back to the folio before we start up the device. I'm not sure I feel that comfortable with how it's attached to the device. You can see there's actually a little bit of a gap there. I've tried some tests where I just flip it open and see if it stays connected, and it does. So I haven't been able to simulate an issue, but I feel like it might fall off at some point. Now, maybe that's just me, but it's not as strong of a connection as I would normally like. Also, if you put the stylus into the loop, the device won't lay flat. It'll lay at a slight angle up on this side. But of course, I guess if you're in this position, you're not going to have the stylus in the loop anyway, so not a huge deal. A couple, I think, ultimately small critiques of the half folio. Generally, it'll get the job done, and I'm not particularly concerned about it. I just wanted to share that because that is kind of a thought, is like, how secure is this cover actually? It feels less secure than I'm used to, but probably will be okay. Okay, let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and press on in here on the power button, and let's get this thing going and see what our startup process is. I may edit this a bit just to kind of zip through it quickly. If some of the timescales are relevant, I'll publish those as we go through. For example, if we have an update, I'll cut off that downtime and time it as we go through. Here we go. Okay, so we're in the startup process. Immediately my instinct is I want to click next with my finger. It's not a touch screen, so I'm going to have to use the stylus. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, I'm not going to read it because I never do. Let's go ahead and keep going. Okay, some interesting issue about upgrading my database. I didn't fully understand. And it looks like, boom, we're right into the device. So not a lot in the setup process. They don't set up, for example, your Wi-Fi. You can see I'm not connected currently. No setting up of the account, and so on. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and just set that up ourselves then manually. I'm going to click on this. Oh, I see that's your drop-down bar. Okay, interesting. Okay, looks like they have not only shortcut buttons and obviously toggles for your connectivity. There's your speech, your speakers rather, toggle, but also it looks like they have a universal pen tray. So that's cool. Oh, what are these themes? Let's go ahead and click on. Oh, I keep wanting to touch. I'm gonna have to program myself. Okay, and then let's go to dark theme. Okay, so I'm not sure I noticed the difference between reading and light, but I'll have to play with that. I'm normally a ballpoint pen guy, so we'll click on that. But let's go ahead into Wi-Fi. Seems to be registering my touches the first time. There's a bit of a lag, but it is registering. So I've turned Wi-Fi toggle on, but I'm probably going to have to go into settings. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's see where, I guess that would be under network. Before we go any further though, you can see it's Android 14. And there's the N10 Pro. Again, no reference to eNote 2, which is fine. Click on, okay, here we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and connect to my internet. I'll get you outside of logging in. Okay, logging into the internet now, and not a surprise, we have an update to the system. This happens a lot with new devices from different manufacturers. It's actually more the exception that there are no updates by the time you have to get to this point. And that's even for a very brand new device as this is, you'll get updates like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and start my timer, and we'll see how long this lasts. Okay, so with the download complete, it took just under 17 minutes, as you can see there. That's actually pretty good. I've seen devices sometimes go 30 minutes, even more on an update, so that's actually on the shorter side. The download was about 12.5 minutes of that, so it was mostly the download, and that was downloading about 1.7 gigabytes. The limitation was their servers. I have a pretty fast internet connection, so that's what caused that. So even if you had a really lightning speed internet connection, it probably wouldn't make a difference because it's more on their end. But again, the overall time is great anyway, so not a problem. I did want to talk about the Stylus a little bit before we kind of continue here. And the Stylus is not too bad. It's definitely a plastic stylus. You can feel that. I wouldn't call it cheap though. I think it's not premium and it's not cheap. It's just a decent stylus. I do like the fact that their button here has a texture. It's flush with the shaft, so you're not gonna run into it just by picking up the device, but you can feel it tactily. I butcher that, but you get what I'm saying. With the texture of that button. So that's kind of a nice touch. You do have a clip. I don't know if you can see it right there. It's actually a legitimate clip. It's not a faux clip. And then the eraser is one of those that you have to kind of push in. Now, one of the unique features of the stylus is we can actually untwist it. And by doing so, you reveal 4 additional nibs really tightly packed here into the shaft. So not only do you get the 10 nibs that we saw in this particular case, but you also get 8 more between the 2 styluses here. They're kind of difficult to pull out, but you can get in there. You can kind of pull it out that way using your fingers. And in fact, even though there is a removal tool on this here, you can actually remove the stylus with your fingers, and you can actually push it back in and get it into place with your fingers as well. So you don't actually need the removal tool. That's more of a courtesy. It's a little tightly packed, as I noted, but I do like this innovation. It means you've got tips on you. If your tip should break for some reason, you're just like, hey, I just need a new tip. It's right in the stylus. This is one of the smartest ways of carrying tips I've seen with a manufacturer. So really nice touch there. So I think overall I'm favorable on the Stylus. It's not my favorite of all time. As I said, it doesn't feel premium necessarily, but it's fine. It gets the job done, and it's got some nice features to it. So a lot of positive things on that front. The other thing I wanted to check out is, what is the writing experience like? And we'll start with this quick sheet, I guess. And just want to write on here and okay, so I do notice viewing this screen as an angle, you can see a little bit of a grittiness or graininess on the screen that you don't see when you're looking straight at the screen. And that's normal for a device as a film on this. There's definitely a film on here, and you can hear it as you write. So that's a pretty nice scratchy sound. I'm happy with that. One of the interesting aspects of this device was supposed to be how connected you are with the writing, because it doesn't have that touchscreen layer, because it doesn't have the front lighting layer. Then you're supposed to be much more connected because the actual e-ink screen is much closer to the surface. It feels connected, but I wouldn't say it's particularly notable with other devices like Supernote or Viwoods. It feels pretty much the same to me, but maybe I'll have a different experience as I'm using the device over time. Let's get that eraser in there. Okay, not my favorite eraser. You definitely need to press in order for it to start working. You can't. Okay, so we have more options here. So here we do have Kindle. Here we do have Kobo and Libby. That's excellent. Okay. And there's Pocketbook. That's wonderful. Okay, let's go to the news. Let's see what we've got there. All right, decent, I guess. Let's go to Tools. All right, I'm not sure about that. Let's go to Office. All right, so here's you've got Outlook. Okay, some of your Microsoft. That's nice. Learning. All right, I guess, and then others. All right, so you do have a lot of reading apps. That is huge. I was about to really kind of slam this device because not having access to the Google Play Store is a bummer. But at a minimum, you really need those basic reading apps, and to have Kindle and Kobo and Libby represented is a huge deal. That would have been a pretty big deficit for this device without those. So that's great that they have them among other apps, so better than we initially thought. Okay, now let's go ahead and get to my initial hardware thoughts. Okay, so now that we've kind of set the stage for this device and how it competes in the marketplace, and we've done the unboxing and the setup, what are my initial thoughts? Well, specific to hardware, there are some interesting and innovative design features here. I mean, the buttons on the device itself stick out, and the fact that they're programmable, or at least there's a selection of choices that you have to set those buttons. The fact that there's pen nibs in the stylus. There's a few neat ideas here that I think are pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to kind of exploring those, particularly the buttons, a little bit further. I don't necessarily think that those features, as nice as they are below the Go 10.3 away, and I think there's a little bit more of a premium quality with the Go 10.3 in terms of its hardware, but I don't think that the Go 10.3 necessarily leaves the Penstar in the dust either. So I see a lot of parity between the two devices. The one thing I will say about the Penstar, which is not an advantage in my opinion at all, even though it's advertised, is this idea that without having a touch layer and without having front lighting, you feel more connected to the device as you write. I did not have that experience. I thought the connectedness was fine, and it's good on the device. I'm not critiquing it, but I don't think it necessarily feels superior to, for example, to the Go 10.3 or for other devices that I've used. You can tell that the e-ink layer isn't as far down. If you look at the border of the device, on other devices, you can see just a little bit more of a shadow that highlights that depth of the screen. And you don't see that here but that's only if you look at the border. At least that's the case with me. So I didn't think from a practical perspective that was any particular advantage. But taking everything all together, the Penstar hardware is fine. I don't have any significant critiques, nor do I have any significant areas where I think it's vastly superior to the Books device or any other. It's fine. Maybe a hair behind, I guess. For example, the Stylus is just a slightly lower quality than a stylus you'd get from Books, but it's still fully functional, and it doesn't call itself out as being inferior. It's just if I think about the two, that's the conclusion I would come to. So I think from a hardware perspective, the Penstar kind of matches the Go 10.3 blow for blow where it counts. But here's the thing, the actual difference is rarely in the hardware. There's a lot of great manufacturers that have solid hardware. It's actually pretty common in this industry. The question will always come down to the execution in the software. And we've seen early on there's a significant disadvantage for the Penstar because it doesn't have the Google Play Store. Now, to its credit, it does have, we haven't gone over this, but it did have good cloud integrations. There's a lot of options there. It has a lot of the major players in terms of e-readers. So it does a good job of covering the most basic requirements that you would hope an e-note taker would have. So that's good news, but it doesn't have the flexibility beyond that you have with the Books Go 10.3 because of the Google Play Store. So that's already kind of a bit of an issue. And given how sophisticated Books is, it's going to be highly unlikely that the Penstar will ultimately compete against the Book. So the real question going forward is, does the price of the Penstar, which is a little bit less expensive than the Books, justify it as the better option than the 10.3, particularly if you're interested in it because it doesn't have a touchscreen, and that's a particular feature you're looking for. Will the software hold up to make that a good choice over Books in that scenario, or maybe some others that you can think of? That's what we'll explore as we go through this video series. So the next one will be huge because even though my visual tours are not really meant to be reviews, they do reflect what the device is capable of, and we'll definitely have a sense after that video of how this device compares to the Books. Even though I won't be making those direct comparisons in the video, it'll be obvious as we go through the details what the Penstar can or can't do. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in that video, and until then, I hope you have a great day.